era in world history, the peace process. And then there's a subdivision of the peace process, and it's called the final status issues. And the final status issues refers to what are supposed to be the most complicated, controversial aspects of the peace process. They're supposedly so controversial, so complicated, that we can't begin any negotiations with them because the negotiations will break down. So we have to put them all the way off into the future, into the final stage of negotiations. And by coincidence or by happenstance, wittingly or unwittingly, it happens that the final status issues coincide almost exactly with the issues that the International Court was asked to address. So the final status issues, for those of you who are familiar with the topic, are borders, settlements, Jerusalem, and then there's a fourth, refugees, which I won't get to right now. So 3 of the 4 questions were put to the highest judicial body in the world. And how did it rule? Number 1, on the question of borders, the court said, that's not complicated. There's a fundamental principle of international law, and that principle is it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. That's a basic principle of international law. Some of you will not remember it because you're heard it. So when George Bush Sr. heard that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August 1990, he went before the world and he said that Mr. Saddam Hussein, or as he called him, Saddam Hussein, has no right to annex Kuwait. Mr. Hussein wanted to make it the 25th province, I think, of Iraq. 25th or 26th? I think it was 25th. What? 19th, excuse me. Well, wanted to make it the 19th province, and President Bush said no, because it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. That's a fundamental principle of international law. And the International Court of Justice said, well, Israel acquired or conquered the West Bank and Gaza in the course of a war, and therefore they have no title to any of the West Bank and no title to any of Gaza. The court said the West Bank and Gaza are the designated unit of self-determination for the Palestinian people. And therefore, the whole of the West Bank and the whole of Gaza, the court repeatedly said, they are occupied Palestinian territories. Sometimes you'll see in the human rights reports, they're referred to as OPT, and that's just the abbreviation for occupied Palestinian territories. Number 2, the question of the settlements. The court said, that's not a complicated question, because under Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention, it's inadmissible for an occupying power to transfer its population to occupied territory. And therefore, Israel has no right, under international law, to transfer its population to the West Bank and earlier Gaza, because they're an occupying power. And so the court ruled that all the settlements, all 500,000 settlers, they are in flagrant violation of international law. Number 3, the question of Jerusalem. Israel says, and its supporters repeat, that Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, is part of the undivided and eternal capital of the Jewish people. But not so, says the International Court of Justice. How did Israel acquire East Jerusalem? The same way it acquired the West Bank and Gaza, in the course of a war, the June '67 war. And under international law, it's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. And therefore, Israel has no title whatsoever to East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, and the court is very clear, they refer to the West Bank, comma, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, as occupied Palestinian territory. I will get to this later, but all of these statements were reaffirmed by the Goldstone report. Richard Goldstone is very clear, East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory. The settlements are illegal, and so forth. Well, that's what they ruled. But some of you might be thinking, reasonably so, well, what was the vote? There are 15 judges sitting on the International Court of Justice. Was it a close vote? And it's fair to say, let's say the vote was 8-7. There's an argument, were that the case, that it's a controversial issue, that it's a contentious issue. But that's not what happened. The vote was on the highest judicial body in the world. The vote was 14-1. There was no debate. There was no contention. For the simple and obvious reason that the principles on which these issues were resolved are basic to international law. The inadmissibility principle, the illegality of settlements, and so forth. There was one negative vote cast by the American judge sitting on the court, Thomas Bergenthal. But even Thomas Bergenthal, the American judge, the only negative vote, he was very careful to qualify his vote. He said, he began his opinion by saying, in fact, I agree with a lot of what the majority has decided. And then he went on to say, on the crucial question, namely the question of those settlements, he said, I agree with the majority. There can't be any question that under international law, the settlements are illegal. Which is to say, on the key question, the settlements, all 15 judges agreed. Now you yourselves have the challenge of assimilating those facts, or we will juxtapose two facts, and then you try to assimilate them. I took what I understand to be 3 of the 4 most controversial issues bearing on the Israel-Palestine conflict, those final status issues, the settlements, the borders of Jerusalem. I then took those issues and looked at how the most respected and authoritative legal body in the world ruled on them. And there was no controversy. How can it be that the allegedly most controversial issues are, in the real world, not controversial at all? Let me now go through 3 features or 3 aspects